and rationale for putting this on the ballot. Obviously, the city doesn't have the power to unilaterally enforce a sales tax, nor would we want that necessarily. It's on the ballot to allow the voters to have their voice and say, okay, here, either we want it or we don't want it. And so this exists, and I'll show you why it exists and what the rationale was behind it. And hopefully you can leave here with a little better understanding of what we were thinking and why we came to this conclusion, all right? So we'll start with, the idea is that we're trying to be responsive as your local government. I know government sometimes has an earned poor reputation for not being responsive to people and the needs of what people want. At the local government side, we hear from you, we live here, this is our community, so we're trying to be responsive to what we need. When there's a tax that's levied, I pay those taxes just like you do. I'm a property owner, I shop locally, sales tax, property tax, all of that affects me and my family just as much as it does many of you. So, do you mind, Clinton? We'll start with this. In 2020, we did a strategic plan. It involved a lot of community feedback, and the idea was that we would get from the community what we need to do as a city, what we should be focusing on. And so from that strategic planning process, which took a long time, it was like a 6-7 month process, we ended up with 5 pillars that everybody from the community kind of dialed down and agreed on. This is quality of life, housing and neighborhoods, economy, downtown, and infrastructure and transportation. 2021 survey results, we had a survey at the end of 2021, second community survey that we've done. We mailed it out to every residence on our billing list, essentially, our water billing list. Property taxes and streets were the 2 things that were shown to be the biggest issues that we face as a community. And we'll talk a little bit more about where that came from. Property taxes specifically, it was second most identified as having an impact on improving the quality of people's neighborhoods. It was the second highest rating for biggest issue facing Atchison in the next 5 years, behind economic development. And property valuations are going up by an average of 12% this year. Those are real numbers. The county just got those numbers sent to us, and so an average of 12% property valuations are going up this year. Streets, only 21% of people were satisfied with streets and sidewalks overall in our survey. It was identified as the second most important service that we are supposed to provide as a city, behind police. Most identified as having the greatest impact on the quality of neighborhoods. It was only 40% of people were satisfied with major city streets and curbs, and only 21% were satisfied with neighborhood streets and curbs. Only 11% of people were satisfied with the alleys and the condition of alleys in this community. So that's the community responding. More on streets in the survey, only 32%. We actually asked the question, if we were to propose a sales tax to help us to improve our streets, well, how would you support it or not? And only 32% said they opposed, 45% said they would support, and 22% said not sure. So us putting the sales tax initiative on the ballot was not just something that was dreamed up and just thrown on there. We literally had some statistically valid survey response that says, hey, maybe we ought to consider this. 93% of survey respondents identified themselves as registered voters. I think that's important because that's how you give your opinion, and that's how you get involved in the community at the very core level, is to go ahead and vote and have your voice heard. As of 2020, streets are being resurfaced at half the rate necessary just to keep them maintained. This is not to improve our streets. This is not to provide a better level of service on our streets, but just to keep them adequately maintained to where they're not deteriorated to the point where people can't even use them. We're only able to resurface at half the rate. Costs continue to rise, as everybody knows. Nobody's been immune to it. Costs are going up everywhere. The inflation's rampant. And so that rate's likely going to be closer to 1/3 here within the next year if inflation continues at the rate it's going. The city would need to spend between $1 million and $1.5 million annually just to keep up, all right? So, even more on streets, our current street maintenance plan calls for debt financing every 3 years. We go out and we debt finance a $1.25 million GO bond issuance. We do a big streets project, and then we have about $400,000 of annual maintenance that we do as part of our operating budget as well for pothole repair and some. We do a little bit of alley work and some small street work. But that's essentially the level that we're funding streets at its current level, okay? We currently have 3 streets GO bond debts on the books in 2014, 2017, 2020, where those are the last ones. Our next one is scheduled to be in 2023 if we follow the same cycle, okay? Long-term use of debt to resurface streets at a level that's not even keeping up with basic maintenance, moderate maintenance standards. That's not a sustainable model long-term. In the last 4 GO bond issuances, the single greatest factor keeping Atchison from increasing their bond rating or getting a better rating, which leads to lower rates when we do issue debt, is that we have a high debt load, all right? So that led us to, okay, we have a streets problem, we have a property tax problem, everybody is aware of it, that those aren't a big secret, and so we're gonna give the community a chance that if you want to, again, you don't have to do this, but if you want to, let's attempt to try to solve some of this. Try to have some property tax relief, try to have some a higher level of street maintenance and street resurfacing. So what we're proposing and what's on the ballot is a 1% general sales tax. It has a 20-year sunset clause, so after 20 years, the voters would have to approve it to keep it, or it would just go away. And the first resolution the second resolution after we voted on the resolution to put this on the ballot essentially says, if this passes, we're allocating 75% to street infrastructure, so that's streets, curbs, alleys, potentially sidewalks, and then 25% to property tax relief. All right, so that's already been passed. So the current city commission has said, if this passes, this is where that money's going directly. Special election is where the ballot is, and I think that's, people are already aware of it. Obviously you are, that's why you're here. Thursday, July 14th is when the special election is going to take place. There will be advance voting, and I don't quote me on this because this is not my department. It's a county service to run elections, but I believe they're going to start doing advance voting, or at least get some mail-in ballots out next week, as soon as next week. We just got the ballot language finalized today, so they're sending that out so they can get the ballots printed, and those will start going out soon. This is a city election. It's not a countywide election. If you're not a city resident, you don't get to vote in it. It's just for city residents. It's a city sales tax. It's an in-person ballot unless you specifically are requesting a mail ballot. Just like you normally would in any other general election, if you want to do mail ballots, you can, but you have to request that from the county. And the typical city polling places will be used. There are 4 locations, and don't ask me to recite those locations off the top of my head, but if you've voted in the past and you know where your precinct votes, those same polling locations will be used for this special election, all right? Current sales tax rate in the city of Atchison is 8.75%. Of that, 6.5% goes to the state. So the state collects all sales tax, okay? And so we don't see the sales tax until the state divvies up whatever portion we get. And when I say divvies that up, 6.5% of the 8.75% stays at the state. We don't see any of it. This county doesn't see it, the city doesn't see it. It's a very high rate. It's the highest rate as far as the state has in our area. And I have a board out there that shows kind of what the bordering states have for their state sales tax rates. I believe Missouri's is 4.225%. So it's quite a bit higher than Missouri's rate. It's higher than Oklahoma's, it's higher than Nebraska's, it's higher than Colorado's, okay? 0.25% goes to the sports complex. A lot of people remember when the sports complex had its quarter percent sales tax ballot initiative, and that does have a sunset. I think it's got 3 or 4 more years left on it. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's coming up here, 26, 27, I believe. And then there's a 1% countywide sales tax for solid waste and joint communications. And if you followed city and county relations at all for the last 20 years, you know how that's going, right? But that exists, and that's part of it. So that's a big chunk of that. That's almost all of that, essentially, that 8.75%. Currently, there is a 1% sales tax that the city has access to, okay? Rates in other cities, if we were going to increase the sales tax, if the voters decided, yes, we want this, we want better streets, we want some property tax relief, then our rate would be 9.75%, okay? It would be a little bit higher than Leavenworth. Leavenworth right now is at 9.5, so they're 0.75% higher than us currently. Although if you go to some shopping areas in Leavenworth, and I picked out Price Chopper for example, because I know some people go to Leavenworth for groceries, they're at 9.9% because they have a special district over the store. So that's what you're paying if you go to Price Chopper in Leavenworth. Chanute, Independence, Coffeyville, Wellington, Spring Hill, Eudora, Lewisburg, Horton, Valley Falls. I picked some smaller cities. I picked some that are similar size. They're at 9.5%, so again, they're 0.75 cents higher than us currently, right? Osawatomie, city smaller than Atchison, they're 9.75% already, okay? So this isn't an unheard of thing. This is not unprecedented. We're not charting new waters here. And I also point out, and we did something, I will open up for questions here in just a minute. This isn't going to go too much longer. Most shopping areas in the Kansas City metro area are over 10%. If you go shopping in Kansas City, chances are you're spending over 10% in sales tax. That's on the Kansas side and the Missouri side. Just about anywhere you go, Legends, Zona Rosa, you go to St. Joe East Hills, you go to North Belton, St. Joe. I mean, you go to other places, you go to Parkville. I mean, if you're going and shopping, downtown Kansas City especially, you're spending over 10% in sales tax every time you go shop anywhere, any of those places, all right? It's not to say we're the same as them or that we should be compared to them. I'm just saying it's not unheard of for a sales tax rate to be at this level. It's not the highest in the area, and people are willing to pay these, and Atchisonians often are willing to pay this. I know that for a fact. So again, you don't like it, that's fine, but that's just trying to provide some comparison. Here's our sales tax revenues. Here's a 1% sales tax would have generated in 2018 $1.769 million. In 19 is 1.884. You can see the growth in 2020, 2.144. We had a huge sales tax year. It was a little inflated because Evergy had a huge project that they were doing here locally, and so a good chunk of the extra, probably a couple $100,000 worth of that was an Evergy project, essentially. Huge project. And then 2021, it went to 2.089. Didn't have any the Evergy project, so that was taken out of that. And then 2022, we're ahead of 21. We're up 9.5% through April, and so we're actually looking to outpace 2020. And so this is what would be generated by the 1% sales tax if it were to pass, is what I'm saying, all right? Anticipated money for streets and sales and tax relief. If you were to take those 2021 numbers, that would have been $1.566 million for streets. That would have been $522,000 for property tax relief. Again, that 75-25 split that we talked about, that resolution is setting aside. In 2021, a mill equaled $73,428. So using our 21 numbers, that would have been 7.11 mills off the mill levy that we would have been able to shave off the city portion of the property tax. And that would have taken the rate from 50.298 in the city to 43.188. So here's our timeline. We did the survey, another survey in 21. The first commission budget workshop we discussed, okay, if the community wants a higher level of service for streets, which we would be in favor of. We don't have the money for it, but if they were, here's a chance for the voters to decide for themselves that yes, we want to do this. So there was some initial discussion about the possibility of a sales tax initiative. Special meeting on May 10th, the decision was made, and it was a special meeting on May 10th because I believe May 3rd we had to cancel a meeting because we had people, our normal regular meeting, because we had two commissioners that were out of town and we couldn't have a meeting. We needed to have a quorum. So we had a special meeting on the 10th and essentially said, okay, we'll let the voters decide. If they want it, they want it. That's great. We'll give a higher level of service for streets. We'll give some property tax relief. If they don't want it, that's fine. We'll just continue as we have been. I mean, those are the options at this point. Excuse me. Special elections July 14th. And this says July 15th. It was state law that the 15th of July is when we're supposed to send our revenue neutral rate to the county clerk. That's a Friday. We actually have until that Monday, so it's the 18th, but it's essentially right after the special election, and that's one of the reasons that election was set at that time. Not the only one, but a very important reason why the special election was set at that time, because we have to tell the county clerk and the state what we are going to potentially level as a property tax, or levy as a property tax. The highest that we would potentially levy, we have to have that to the state and the county by July 15th, right, July 18th. So if passed, the tax would begin on January 1st, 2023. So why the expedited timeline? I just mentioned the revenue neutral rate is due, and that's part of the state budgeting timeline. We have no control over that. We just have to follow that timeline. We expected property taxes potentially to increase 10 to 15% if the levies were kept the same. I'm not saying that's gonna happen, but that's what it would happen if levies were status quo based on 12% property tax or property valuations increased. Next debt finance streets project is 2023. You guys have been following interest rates, they're going up, they're gonna continue to go up, so we thought if we could get ahead of that and not have to do that debt financing of a street project, if this sales tax passes, we won't have to do that. We won't have to do that anymore at all. Nothing to gain by waiting. We thought about, well, what if we waited? What could we do? Well, we could educate the community more, maybe, I guess, but that's what we're trying to do now. We're doing a major campaign online. We sent a flyer to everybody who gets a water bill. Those should have already gone out, unless you haven't gotten your water bill yet for the month. I believe everybody should have it about by now or close to it. And then there's the potential for multiple sales tax questions. I don't know if you've been following the counties in the state legislature. There was a piece of legislation that was being pushed by the county commission and to essentially allow them to levy their own 1% sales tax for solid waste and joint communications, and try to make the one that exists go away, so that way the city wouldn't get any of those funds at all in the future. So they could keep those funds and decide how to divvy those up. And so we didn't want to have those confusing. We didn't want to have the potential for multiple sales tax questions on the same ballot and have people confusing one for the other because they're not related at all. This is in direct response. Our sales tax question is in direct response to the community's feedback that we need better streets and our property taxes are too high. That's why we're having it. It has nothing to do with the county. So here's the ballot language. I mentioned that today we finally got that finalized. And I say we because we have to work with the county clerk's office because they're the election official, and then they have to get it approved by the state. And they sent us the proof today for final approval, and that we've already sent them. So here's what the language will say. Shall the following be adopted? Shall retailer sales tax in the amount of 1% be levied in the city of Atchison, Kansas for the purposes of transportation infrastructure maintenance and improvements, property tax relief, and the provision of general government services to take effect January 1st, 2023 and to expire on December 31st, 2042. Now there's a line in there that might probably caught everybody's attention. It says for provision of general government services. Now, the city passed a resolution saying, here's what we're gonna do with it. But if there were to be some kind of, and the city's gonna have to answer that. I mean, if this passes, they've told the voters, here's why we're doing this. Okay, but if there were some kind of major catastrophe down the line and the city said, hey, that's money that could be better used. We like the good streets, we like the property tax relief, but that's money that could be better used to handle some kind of emergency. That allows that to take place because it essentially makes it a general sales tax. All right, but like I said, if we were to change that unilaterally as saying we, the city, then we would lose all credibility with the voters. Our chance of getting anything done, them trusting us to do anything in the future would be diminished. So the reality of the situation is this is going toward streets and property tax relief. All right. I want to mention that on the cityofatchison.com website, you see this, there's a banner at the very top of the page. If you click on that, there's nothing to click, but if you were to click on that, all the information that I'm sharing here today, all the slides, future information, that's available there. We are continually updating that with as much information as we possibly can. So if you need more information or not sure about something, you can look at the resolutions that we passed on this, the one that calls for the ballot question and the one that allocates the money. Those are both linked there. You can go to that site and go to that page and you can find as much information hopefully as you need. And I believe that's it for my presentation. I want to follow that up by saying we don't love taxes. It's not like we just want to have higher taxes here. That's not our goal. This is literally us saying we have a need, the community is pointing out this need. We don't have any revenue to do this. We don't have enough revenue to provide this service. Police, fire, our public works. Now I say public works, the streets we're doing now, the many parks and watershed dams that we have to mow that we're responsible for. We don't have enough resources for those services, much less to provide a higher level of street service. Okay, so that's why this is, if you want a higher level, this is one option for us to do that, and we'll let the voters decide on that. And so if you guys have questions, I'd be happy. We have a mic over here, so you can ask your question, and I'd be happy to try and and do what I can to answer that. So, yes, sir.
How many respondents did you have in your survey?
How many respondents do we have in our survey? It was 400 some, I believe, it was around the 400 number mark, because I believe it was like 300, 350 is what we needed to have a statistically valid survey.
So as a percentage of our population, what was the representation?
That's a good, I mean, we have 11,000 people in our city, so whatever 400 is as a percentage. Like I said, we needed 300 to 350 to have a statistically valid sample. The ballots were mailed to the survey was mailed to every house, so every house had the opportunity. It was online, we promoted it, so there wasn't some secret, this wasn't a secret survey. This was, please, we want your feedback. We'll be doing more of these surveys too. I mean, you guys are seeing how we're using this survey to gauge the community feedback and what we're supposed to be doing. Please participate in these as we do these. Every couple of years, we're going to do these so that way we can gauge, how we're doing with the community. Yes, sir.
Have you identified the streets for improvement?
We know a lot of streets need improvement. I'm not going to say we have this plan that's lined out that here's where for year one would be, here's year two, here's year three. I'm not going to say we're at that level yet, but all you have to do is drive down the streets and you know which streets need help, right? I mean, it's not a big secret. You can drive down any neighborhood throughout our city and you can find streets that need this.
So how do we know 1% is enough?
We have identified that, and this happened a couple years ago, where we identified that we thought for routine, proper maintenance, and this isn't for the highest level of street conditions, but for just a moderate level of street conditions, we had identified about $1 million-ish a year and that was a couple years ago before this inflation's taken place. And so we think we can make the progress we need to have quality streets in this community at about $1.5 million. And as the cost of things grow, sales taxes will naturally grow as well. The revenues, not the rate. The rate's 1%. You're going to be, that 1%, but those revenues will continue to grow as well. And so 75% of those will go right back into streets. And so that number will grow as the sales tax receipts grow. And one cool thing, one thing about a sales tax, as opposed to property taxes for using this as a funding of this type of service, is when visitors come in here, and we get a lot of visitors for Benedictine College, we get a lot of visitors for Haunted, we get a lot of visitors just coming through for whatever reason. When they come in, they're using streets. And so when they're spending dollars here, this gives us an opportunity to use, them to help us pay for our streets. Rather than property taxes then you're focusing on just the residents and the business owners here in the community to fund that. When there's a sales tax, everybody who's shopping here, people who come from out of the community, that they're helping to foot that bill. And they're using the service and they're using the streets, so it's not like it's an unfair tax.
Does the city get very much like a fuel tax that's collected by the state? Does the city get any of that for street maintenance, or is that strictly highway?
There's a little bit that we do get, and it doesn't go very far at all.
How much is a little bit,
I got our operating budget right here. I could probably, if you want to give me afterwards, I'd be glad to, look it up for you specifically.
No,
but
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've got right here exactly how much that is, but
Is that the money we used for that new project going up Main Street, that big sidewalk project? That's not road use tax money?
No, that was not. There was a grant that we received. I believe it was KDOT, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not the expert on that one. I believe it was KDOT, and if I could, maybe a transportation alternatives program is I believe what that was.
That's not funded to the fuel tax?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I thought it was.
No.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Being that this is a general use tax, and I'm glad to see the streets being addressed because they need to be addressed for the last 15, 20 years. I have a real problem with the sales tax being, number one, it's a general use tax.
Mm-hmm.
And the next commission, take everybody that's here that's involved in this, they can go and rescind those resolutions and use that tax money for anything. And the fact that you have a 20-year sunset on it, a lot of things can happen with that money in the next 20 years that never were intended.
Well, I have two responses to that. One, if the city decides to change what they're using the money for, that's gonna erode any credibility we have with the public. That doesn't help us at all. And even not just us, but our future successors, that doesn't help them either if all of a sudden and the 20-year sunset is gonna hold people liable to this, because if they start using the money elsewhere, when this thing comes up for a vote for if you wanna decide to renew it, and the money's been spent elsewhere, what kind of reaction do you think is gonna happen with the voters?
Well, just so you know, that's kind of what has happened. In 1981, we had a sales tax for a new fire truck.
And it didn't have a sunset. You see what I'm saying? The sunset is what holds, is what's gonna hold our feet to the fire.
But it was the fact that it was
Yes, it
on,
is.
the fact that it was on the ballot, that this is what it was gonna do, like this is gonna be on the ballot, doesn't mean that's what it's gonna do. And and that's my point is, if you want to be absolute, and the citizens want to be absolutely positive that their streets are being repaired with specific money, that's why you have bonds, because you can't turn around and bond, have a $5 million bond and do something else that's not gonna be.
How are we gonna pay for that bond? That's just issuing debt. I mean, how do we pay for that bond?
And then you're raising your.
You raise your property tax, exactly. I mean, if you either go for a sales tax or you raise your property taxes. So you have to find the revenue somewhere, even if you bond it. The revenue's gotta be found somewhere. And so right now we're doing the little bit we can using general fund. It's not very much. It's obviously not enough for an adequate level of street maintenance. Again, the numbers don't lie in the survey, but you just gotta drive around, you can see them.
I'm not saying we don't need street repairs.
Right.
I'm just saying, with the best of intentions that we have that you have in this room right now, doesn't mean that's what's going to happen.
And that's why there's a sunset, because that holds our feet to the fire. That holds us accountable. Because I promise you that the commission in 20 years is not gonna want that money to go away when they could be using it for streets.
So why don't you do it for 5 years then?
I'm not sure that would make a big enough dent in the issue that we have. Again, we have drive around and you can see it's probably going to take us 20 years just to get caught up on an even keel. That's roughly the rate.
A lot of these streets, and I live literally just behind this building. My street hasn't been touched in 30 years, and the gravel driveway that I drive on for every single day for the home edition I'm doing is in better condition than my street. And that's a lot like all of these dead-end streets. You say drive around a lot. When do you drive up a dead-end street unless you live there?
And that's
nobody cares about it.
And that's the point, is we don't have enough funding to do the streets unless.
But you're paving alleys across town, and you're putting curbs
Again.
in up here on, grass lots.
Everybody has needs. That's what I'm saying. The whole city has needs.
Does that grass lot have a need for that curb, or what? Does that
The
alley?
curb specifically, I don't know what lot you're talking about, but I'm assuming the
Right
curb.
across from the water treatment plant.
Right, and the reason that was set up was because of a legitimate water runoff issue that we were trying to help address.
And then the whole.
And that we're liable
It's
for,
everywhere.
okay? So that's what that was about.
But there's lots of streets, I've seen y'all do downtown.
I get
a bunch
it.
of times, but, it tears up my truck just driving up my street.
And that's what we're trying to address here, sir. That's the whole point of this.
Yeah, but mine's not been touched for 30 years.
It's hard to justify.
Right behind
that-
here, the
look,
retaining wall dumps water onto my street, which tears it up, and they don't take care of their retaining wall, and it dumps into my yard, which now I have valleys in my yard.
I get the frustration. You're not the only one. There are a lot of, you mentioned a dead-end street. There are a lot of dead-end streets and streets that don't have a lot of traffic that haven't been addressed in decades. That's the reality of our situation. And how do you explain that politically to the voters that we're addressing a street that 3 or 4 people don't use when there's needs on every street in the community?
But
Okay?
you're putting entrances to the brick streets just 2 blocks down from my house, that if the kids would go down it too fast, which they can, it's got a foot drop at the beginning of one of them. People don't even use those streets. Even the ones on the other side of town where they got put in, the brick isn't even any better. It's easier to get onto the street, but the street's still bad.
They're real issues. You're right. I get it. These are real issues. The streets are in bad shape. We need more. We need to do more. Again.
You don't see it in lower income areas.
Well, I think I disagree with that, but And
I
we
live
can,
lower
and we can go do,
income
we can do a map of the city and show you all the things we've done. That's not what this is, the intention here is to do, but I disagree with you there. It's not an income thing at all. And we can point out some streets in lower income areas that have been done over the last, 15 years, but there's just not enough streets being done, period, and that's the problem. That's the point. That's what we're trying to address here.
Why are we doing those curbs down here, like, down here by Midwest on Main Street, where you have is that some kind of a traffic recommended thing or something, where it looks like that there's like if you have a truck there, you can only make a corner because there's a curb, like, what was the idea of those? I just got off the subject.
I honestly, I'm not an engineer. I don't know that, and I can't answer that question right now.
Is there mow strips on theirs?
What's that?
You putting strips in there to mow, putting green areas on both sides of that sidewalk?
Which one what are you talking
Down
about?
on Main?
I'm not sure what the exact final look is gonna be on that. Honestly, I haven't even looked at the design, to be honest. I'm the wrong person to be asking that question to. So I don't know the answer to that question. I think, I'd like to try and keep on kind of more of the subject. I mean, there are a lot of issues, and we'd love to have you come to a commission meeting and say, hey, help us with something, but, that generally doesn't happen either. Yes, ma'am?
So, I mean, I know none of you have been on the commission for 30 years, but how did we get here? How did we get to the fact that there's streets in this town that haven't been touched in 30 years? Why?
It's
Like, what was happening 30 years
Well,
ago?
this is an ongoing issue, okay? And I can start to address it. This goes back longer than 30 years. This goes back to, about 1910, Atchison was a city of about 18,000 people. The footprint of Atchison was about a third of the size it is now. So over the years, we've had people leave the community, our population has decreased, our volume within, our density within the core has decreased. Some people have spread out. It's created more liabilities for the city to have to maintain. And so we've got to a point where we have more liabilities than we can possibly maintain in water and wastewater infrastructure, street infrastructure, sidewalks, curbs, any infrastructure related thing. It's a direct result of the fact that a lot of our infrastructure is overbuilt for the size of city we are population wise, and our property taxes are already too high. You know what our sales tax rate is. It's not like we have all these extra revenue sources to fund that. The answer is to try, and this is not a quick fix, and it's an incremental thing. It's going to take time, and we're doing what we can to try it. Is to try and recruit people into the community to fill up the density in the community, trying to infill, filling of the population, more apartments, more multifamily housing, that kind of stuff. That can help us. That'll spread the burden out without increasing our footprint and our liability. But that's a long-term thing, and that's a hard thing to ask. I mean, as it is now, we don't have enough housing, so we need to try and address the housing so we can recruit people to come here. And I think a big answer to that is multifamily housing, apartment style living, multiplexes, those types of things. This is a huge issue that it's not going to be fixed just like this, because it didn't happen just like this, right? This has been 110 years in the making. Okay, and so all that factors into why we are where we are now. And the simple reality of it is, and we have these conversations, it's budget season, we're having budget conversations now. I'm talking to the wastewater folks, I'm talking to the water folks, the folks who work on our infrastructure, work on the pipes, and there's legitimate needs in this community for, we need a wastewater treatment plant, it's 60 years old, and we can't even find parts to fix some of the things that need to be done in that wastewater treatment plant. So, I mean, the needs are all across the board. And it all harkens back to the fact that our liabilities are too high for the level of population we have, and so we just try to do the best we can through prioritization, through community feedback, and that type of thing. And literally, that's what it is. It's just doing the best we can. And so I wish there was a better answer for you. I wish there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We could say, hey, here, let's fix this, but that just doesn't exist. So we got to try and address it the best we can. It's not perfect. It sucks because we have streets that haven't been paved in 30 years. I get it, but that's just the reality of the situation. Any other questions?
How do you pick and choose where you're going to start with this if it gets passed as far as streets?
That's a good question. We don't have a full streets plan yet as far as that's concerned, but I mean,
Street.
it would be easy for us to say, it would make sense for us to say, okay, let's get some community involvement and make sure we have every street identified that needs some work, and then we can start to work through that and start to create some action plans specifically year after year, and so people can know, okay, well, it's not now, but at least I know it's coming. And I think that's a realistic expectation of the community, of us. But you know,
I mean, I just think on a lot of people's opinion, it's gonna be, you know, if my street is gonna get done, say in the next 2 years, where somebody else's might be in 15 years, it's like, man,
Right.
that's,
I understand that.
but obviously the higher traveled or, you know, more populated areas, you'd think you'd start with, you know, but.
Well, that's been a lot of what's the impetus for why we've done the streets we have and haven't, is you know, a number of folks that travel, the number of people that impacted, the number of people that can get benefit from it. And that goes into a lot of the decision making we've been making, and of course, just, you know, overall, you know, deterioration, whether you can actually drive down the street or if it's, you know, in many cases it's pretty rough, but, you know,
Well, I live
it just,
in
it varies.
Westridge,
Mhm.
so I think ours are about to get done,
Mhm.
and our streets haven't been touched in a lot of years. And I
Well,
think they're getting ready to do it, and it got annexed in 2006, I believe,
Right.
and, I mean, it's way past due for being done.
I know Westridge is on one of these plans. I believe it's for this year, if I'm not mistaken.
I think I talked to Lisa, I think it's this
Yeah.
month, right?
Yeah.
Or next month or
So
somewhere.
the contractor for this year, we were able to, because of 2020, the growth in revenue and whatnot, and we had pared back our spending in 20 because of COVID, so we were in a great financial position coming into 21 and 22 especially coming into 22, because even in going into 21, we didn't want to spend too much money. We didn't know what COVID was going to do. We wanted to be very conservative. But we ended up with some extra revenue sitting there from that growth in sales tax specifically, and being very frugal. And we did a special streets project for this year, which is out of turn. It's not something we can do every year, because it's not like we're going to have this extra pot of money sitting there every year. But we literally we said, okay, we have some overages. We're going to sink it into the one thing that we think the community needs the most, and that they said they need the most, and that's streets. That's what we've done. And so we have about $1 million street project that's going on this year. And that'll be part of it. I know Main Street will be, you know, if you've driven down Main Street, you know how much of a mess that is right now. I think that'll be part of it as well. But there's some other streets too. It's not just those two, but yes. And
Yeah, I just think that's gonna be, for a lot of people, I think we'll probably agree where, you know, when is my street gonna be done? That's just.
that's
you know,
fair.
and that's the hard part, you know?
That's
You
fair.
don't wanna just, well, I'm gonna buy a house in this street because our streets are gonna get fixed.
Right.
You know, but.
That's fair, and I get it. Yes, sir.
So like you got all these brick streets that never get really touched at all, you know? Why am I having to pay for?
We've been, and I don't know about your street specifically, I can't speak to it, but we've done a lot of work on brick streets to try and shore up the foundation underneath them and relay them to try and get them to quit from being so, you know, ragged. Because the brick streets actually have a longer shelf life than just about anything else we can put out there. And so we've been doing a lot of work, and in fact, I think we did some kind of a pilot program this year on 4th Street, that we're trying a new type of foundation build up underneath those bricks. And if it takes and it works well, we'll deploy it throughout our brick streets gradually over time as we can get to them.
We looked at like using like recycled materials, you know, like Las Vegas, they take all their crushed beer bottles, and it goes right into their asphalt machines.
That'd be really cool if we had something like that to do. I would love to do that. I think that'd be awesome.
A lot of roofing material ends up into the asphalt machines too. You know,
Right.
I don't see, you know, right now you just take it to the dump and they bury it.
Yeah, I know we don't have that type of machinery at this point. I'm not sure what, you know.
It's,
Could we get that type of machinery? Wouldn't that save us money in the long run if we don't? do it?
Maybe, yeah, potentially. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it'd be worth at least looking into, sure. Yeah.
they change the whole way we do the operations.
Sure. a lot of most of our street stuff is done by contract. We don't do most of the street. I mean, we do some pothole repair. We do some alleys and some smaller streets. We started doing. We've got some new equipment in the last couple of years that allows us. We have a crew that does that, but that's not their whole job. So there's literally a few months or like a month and a half, 2 month period where they're working on that, and we don't have very much budget for the actual asphalt. But when we do, we try. We've been trying to do more of that as well, which we think can help us solve the problem. But it's just not enough yet. Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to reiterate that I'm glad that it's being addressed, and I don't want you to think that I'm negative about, because 20 years ago, we needed to start this. And
I understand, yeah.
But I do have a little bit, my biggest problem is the fact that it's a general use tax, and even though we, our best of intentions, and this is one thing that scares the living heck out of me, is that when we have a new commission, a new management in 7 or 8 years,
Yeah.
all they have to do is say, okay, we're not gonna do that, and you can say, well, they have to hold their feet to the fire, but.
They're gonna have a hard time explaining politically. They're gonna have a hard time I'm not saying it will never happen, it couldn't happen, Bill, I'm not gonna say that. They're gonna have a hard time explaining politically if the ballot question said streets, infrastructure, and maintenance, and property tax relief, and they use it for something else. That's gonna be a hard sell politically, and I hope that.
Hey, and I'm not to touch another subject, but the current countywide sales tax, what you talked about earlier, what was on the ballot ended up having nothing to do with how the money's being spent.
That's not true. Every single dollar for that countywide sales tax is going towards solid waste and joint communications, which is what it was intended for. Every single dollar.
That's not what they want.
That's what the initiative said, the ballot said, and that was 93. We're in 2022, and every single dollar is going toward solid waste and joint communication right now.
I think it's working just fine.
So I'm just
saying.
And that doesn't have a
When you have
sunset.
a general use tax, that's exactly what it means. It's general use.
I get that.
You can be specific about it today, but in a matter of years, or in a matter of 1 year, if it passes, you guys can turn around. And I'm not saying that's what you're gonna do. I'm just saying you have that capacity with the general use tax. And I think that's where the people's skepticism will come from, is because they've seen it already.
I got no problem with skepticism. I used to work in the newspaper business for a lot of years, naturally a skeptic, especially of government. I get it. I will point to that countywide sales tax, 1% sales tax. It's a general use tax, doesn't have a sunset. They could use it for anything they wanna do. What's it being used for? What's it being used for?
No,
Solid waste and joint communication.
No,
30 years later.
I think it's working fine personally.
And that's why I have hope that this is going to work like we're saying it's gonna work, because that's what we're asking for, and we've proven as a community that we can follow a general sales tax but by using it with what it's meant to be used for. And so we're just asking for us to be able to address the streets and hopefully give you some property tax relief. That's yes, sir.
What other infrastructure needs does the city have currently besides streets in terms that are big projects?
I mentioned the wastewater treatment facility is 60 years old and probably past its shelf life. I mentioned that we literally can't find parts. We're having to engineer and play MacGyver on creating parts to make sure that stays running to keep our wastewater treated before it goes back into the Missouri River. And so that's a huge liability right now that we're facing as a community, and we'll have to address down the line. And there are plenty others. I mean, we've got, and it's not just streets, it's in sidewalks, it's curbs, it's in alleys. That'll be that's what we're hoping will be addressed by this sales tax. But there are plenty of other liabilities that aren't going to be addressed by this. And we have water liabilities, wastewater liabilities are things that are coming to mind. What's that? Storm sewer? Yes, yeah. Storm sewer runoff is a huge one, because there are issues with. I mean, anybody who saw the rains that we had this spring, and some of the issues we had in some of the neighborhoods with the runoff, that's an issue that we're behind and can't keep up with. But we're doing the best we can. Those are huge liabilities. I mean, I could go on and on. We have more parklands, and I'm talking about our watershed districts and all of our parks, and more property to mow than most cities that are 3 or 4 times our size. Okay, and so that's a huge liability, and I would argue we probably can't keep up with that at an adequate rate, at least as you and I would be expected to mow our lawn. And so, again, these are all liabilities that we have, and we have only so much money to go around. So that's not everything, but that's like 5 or 6 things already.
I think, someone asked a question earlier about, why are we in this situation?
Mhm.
And I think part of the reason is because as taxpayers, we don't want to pay any taxes.
Of course.
And, quite honestly, I mean, we've enjoyed extremely low interest rates now for the last 5 to 7 years, and if the community had infrastructure needs, we should have been addressing those, post haste and getting everything on the list that we could possibly need, because there probably won't be another time in our lifetimes where those infrastructure needs could have been, addressed and probably put in place at a lower cost than what they could have. And so the reason we're in the situation with the streets right now is because the people who sat in your chairs in previous commissions over the years didn't make responsible decisions about putting infrastructure in place at the time that they needed to. They chose not to raise property taxes, they chose not to spend the money, and chose those things at a time when the cost to do it would be probably a third to a quarter of what it would be today.
I would offer up that one thing that's hamstringing us as a community financially that we don't have very much control over is this combined sewer overflow issue. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And we're literally being forced by the EPA through the KDHE. I say forced, we've entered an agreement with them because we have to try to act like, be good actors to participate in this. But we're being forced to when our sewer system was designed 100 years ago, was state of the art. But all the storm runoff kind of at some point, based on, depending on rain levels and whatnot, ends up mixing with, our wastewater, or our non-storm sewer wastewater. And so that could get dumped in the river, and that's a big issue, obviously. And so that's a multi-million-dollar fix. I mean, we're talking, tens and tens, maybe even up to $100 million worth of infrastructure we're gonna have to do over the course of way past our lifetimes. That's not gonna be fixed.
Is there a city sewer overflow out in where I live in Westridge?
No, that's not on the grid.
The question I have, and this was, not to go on a long story, but most people in here probably know about the septic issues that Westridge had, where we're in the city limits, we're on septic.
Right.
When the city annexed, and there's not proper lateral lines and a whole bunch of stuff, and when it all happened, I dug into it and did a lot of research, and I was told by the KDHE that, she said, why are you paying CSO fees? They said, you shouldn't be paying that. So when I asked Mike Steck, when he worked for the city, he had no answer. But the way the city put it in their verbiage, everybody will pay it.
Well,
Which,
it's because
in
it
my
was.
opinion, it's wrong.
It was mislabeled a CSO fee. It's a stormwater fee, and that's at the time it was mislabeled as a CSO fee, but the reality is it's a stormwater fee.
Yeah.
And so you do have a stormwater liability, and we do address the stormwater through curb and things like that up there. We've tried to over the past few years to help you guys with that. So it's not like you're not getting any service for that. I get your point though. Any other questions about the street sales tax? This is our intentions. I hope that you understand that. I want to make sure that I've addressed all the questions out there. I did write down a few of the things that I've been seeing out in the community. I want to make sure that we have everything. This is a city sales tax, so you have to be a city resident to vote on July 14th. None of the money is going to be used for the airport in any way, shape, or form. In fact, no city money is going to the airport in any way, shape, or form at this point. When it comes to the new runway that's being built for the next couple of years, that's all going to be FAA money and private funds. There's a small local match, but that's all being taken care of through private donations locally. So there's no city money there. Again, this is separate from the county stuff. This has nothing to do with the county. This is just our own attempt at fixing a problem. And it's really up to you guys. If you guys don't want it, then we won't have it. We'll keep going keep going as we have been. But this is just giving us a chance to potentially address it if the community decides that this is what they want. So, yes, sir.
I just have one more question. And I have no idea what our bonding limit is right now, but if we were to, cause we're bonding every 3 years now.
Right.
About $500,000 a year, so
Right.
$1.5 million for every.
Mhm.
Is our bonding limit that amount, or do we have a limit, could we say bond $6 million and?
That's a complex question with a complex answer, and it's kind of hard I mean, because there's a certain amount we can issue of debt per year of GO bonds and have it essentially bank backed, and it affects the interest rate and the quality of the rate. And so there's a limit to every year of how much we can bond, and then there's a total max of how much we can bond as a community based on our size. And so yeah, I mean, we can't just leverage everything at once. Because we do have some
I was
limitations.
thinking in terms of taking the current bonds that we have.
Right,
Pay them off, have one bond, have,
like a big project at once.
kind of that, I mean, I know it's, when you build a house, you don't build one room at a time, you build
Right,
a house.
right.
And, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but.
That hasn't been at the forefront of our thought process on this. We want to try to get out of the debt issuance process, but at the same time, if the community demands it and there is that possibility, if we do get a funding source like this, that we could do a big bond issuance to do a big chunk of it at a time, rather than just doing $1.5 million a year. Maybe we do $3 or $6 million at one chunk, and do some major community overhauls at one time. There's a possibility of that. I don't want to promise that, because I don't know that that's what, I'm not sure that I would advise that as the financial guy here for the city, but but that's a possibility down the road if the commission were to decide to do so. Yes, sir.
Would this be used for putting curbs along some streets? Is that part of the whole?
Potentially, yes. The idea is that we can use it for streets, curbs, alleys, and even potentially sidewalks. But I mean, I think it just kind of I think the streets is the main thing we're gonna have to hammer on, and alleys. I mean, alleys are bad shape too. I mean,
I used to think that curbs were not necessary. I'm coming to think they are way more necessary.
I'll tell you, if you see the wastewater or the surface runoff issues during storms, then you'll see that curbs are absolutely necessary in most instances. Yeah.
I skipped curbs and gutters both for a while. I'm
Yeah.
wrong on both issues.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, isn't it true that the more bonds that you issue and everything, your credit rating continues to fall? And when the credit rating falls, then you get a higher percentage of tax on anything
Of interest,
that
yes. Yeah.
you use.
Mhm.
The other thing is, why would you wanna do that and tax people here
Mhm.
when people coming from the outside, coming to Atchison to shop, have fun in Atchison and everything?
Sure.
They are going to share
Yeah.
in this,
Correct.
not just the voters.
That's
Okay, so you're asking, let's take on the debt versus let's spread it around to
Oh.
people that come here, and it's stuff that you're buying. It's not like you're being forced to come into Atchison and buy this.
That's right.
But people do come here, let's get them to help us pay for this.
That's a point that I didn't make in our presentation that I think needs to be said, is that this raising of the tax rate, if it were to go to 9.75%, there's no statistical evidence through any studies or through what any other city has done that that's going to affect the shopping habits of anybody. It's not gonna cause people to stop coming to Atchison. It's not gonna cause people to drive to Leavenworth, especially not at $5 a gallon to go shop. It's not gonna change shopping habits. That's not justification for just doing whatever you want, but I'm just saying it's not gonna hurt our local businesses if this goes to 9.75% is my point with that. Yes, sir.
Can you give any guidance on where the current sales tax revenue is generated? How much is generated from food, how much is generated from Missouri? Do we have any detail on that?
I don't know that. I think I can get some of that information for you, depending on what you're wanting. I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't wanna dive deep, but it'd just be interesting to know what the sources are, current sales tax revenue.
Maybe, that gives me a good idea. I've been, we're doing this campaign online to try and share information on on why we're asking for this tax or at least proposing it to the public. Maybe that sounds like a good idea for a future post is, where sales tax is generated, where are they coming from? I'll tell you right now, the biggest chunk of our sales tax in this community, I think you all can guess where it's coming from. Walmart. Walmart's, it's by far the biggest sales tax generator in our community. And so, and I'll tell you what, there's people that come from out of the community to shop at our Walmart.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody that goes to the BC and the student up there, they're going up to Walmart to get some stuff and get some groceries and stuff. So, this, you know, and that's by far, you know, our number one sales tax generator in this community, so. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of rabbit hole-y, so bear with me. But I'm still thinking about the population density and the infill housing issues
Sure.
and trying to increase the population to spread the tax debt around, right?
That sounds, yeah,
So all I can keep coming back to is that wages here last time I knew were about 12% behind the rest of the state.
okay. I
That's
don't know
from
that,
the last,
I don't know that
whatever
offhand,
the
but,
last
okay.
thing was that I saw, but how do we attract more people from the outside to come here to live and establish themselves if they can't, there's nowhere for them to work that makes a decent wage?
I think that's good, I mean,
Like, I'll tell you.
obviously that's
I
not the
just
government's
quit my
role, right, is to go and tell
job.
people, hey, you gotta raise your salaries, right, but,
Well, I mean, I just had to quit my job and take something else.
Understood.
Because I can't afford to live on the salary I'm getting paid, working at one of the top employers in this town.
understood.
And, I mean, it's like a revolving door.
I think that the top employers at some point are gonna have to, they're gonna face that, or they're gonna have to, their wages are gonna naturally have to come up. I mean, that's the whole point of our,
It's bad right now.
I get it, I
People
understand.
are dropping like flies, jumping off ship, going to work somewhere else, and
Yeah,
overall, it's not good for our community.
I hear you, that's fair.
So
And
I'm concerned.
we have jobs, it's a good point, maybe we don't have high enough paying jobs. I know that we definitely don't have enough housing to attract folks to even the jobs that are higher, that we may have that are higher paying.
You have to get people to wanna come to work though.
Yeah, well,
I have a business.
that's a whole different can of worms.
You can't solve that one.
Yeah, there's no sales tax that's gonna fix that.
But anyway, I'm just concerned.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a comment. I want to commend you guys. I appreciate the surveys. I appreciate the education. I'm in favor of this. I think it'll spread around so that we can fix some things that need to be done. Because if you don't do it, the burden's gonna be on the taxpayers. You're guys gonna have to raise the property taxes to pay bills.
Well, I appreciate that. We, like I said, we do live here, we're part of this community, and so I get it, I'm not trying to raise taxes, just, it's not fun. Nobody likes raising taxes
Well,
of any
that's
kind, even sales taxes.
And what's disappointing is we as a community that do not participate in the surveys when you guys try to get our input. So that's on us.
Well, and I just wanna point out that we're using those surveys, they're statistically valid, and we're finding that out, and we're finding it out consistently that it's being backed up when we try to do things, and there's some pushback that, you know, it's not hurting us at the ballot box because those surveys, they're statistically valid, they're very well supported. And it's just the point that I'm trying to make is participate in those, please, because we are using them and it's helping us shape our policy. And I say our policy, the commissioners use that information as kind of a way to kind of look into your house and say, what do you need, what don't you need, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong? Let's fix it. Let's fix what we can, and let's celebrate what we're doing well. And so those surveys are used. That's a feedback tool for us. And so please participate, because stuff like this comes out of that.
Joe, it's not a question, but
Yes.
do you have examples of like a tax that's been done like this in different communities to fund, like I think like pools or anything?
Sure.
Anything in-
Yeah, there's sales taxes are done all over the state and in every state to do stuff like this. Pittsburgh just passed a couple years ago a street sales tax very similar like this. A lot of communities will do it and they'll say, well, we're going to do a sales tax for public safety, and so that, you know, they might do it for police and for fire and you know, to help keep their wages up. And so what, you know, and we could do that too, I guess, and just free up money elsewhere to do it. But I don't know. I think that people are okay with us using the current revenue sources we have on our public safety, because there are two highest rated services, our police and our fire. So, Yeah, but there are, a lot of other communities are using these means as a way to help them fund infrastructure needs, especially streets. Streets are becoming more and more popular to be funded through sales taxes because, like I said, people come to shop in your community from outside your community. They're using the streets, so this is the kind of one way to help balance out. While they're using it, they can help pay for the maintenance of those. Any other questions?
Thank you.
I appreciate you all showing up. Whether you vote for it or not, the fact that you're here and you're giving us some feedback and you're keeping us honest and asking the questions and that's cool. To me, that's what this is all about. That's what the government's supposed to be about, especially at a local level. I mean, we hear this, we hear what you're saying, and we get a little frustrated on Facebook sometimes because there's some folks that just like to complain, but we still see it, and so when we see the questions, we consider those questions as potentially they're legitimate questions, and we try to see, well, do we have an answer for them, and that's the point, is you got to keep us honest, and I think this is a good exercise for everybody to kind of come out and participate in something like this. So, anything else? Thank you all, I appreciate it. Oh, did you have something, Bob? Something, Bill?
I kind of echo what she says. I'm glad they're doing something. I unfortunately don't support the sales tax. I do support fixing the streets. I just want to see it bonded because then it's absolute.
I hear you.
That's just because the sales tax we can fix streets for a couple years and then quit.
I hear you, Bill. We could bond it, but we still have to pay the bill. I mean, we don't have revenue source to pay that bill even if we bond it. So,
And Bill,
and that's raise property taxes,
I'll make
right?
one
And I don't want to do that.
I'll make one comment as a commissioner, and you've been a commissioner before too, but I mean, even though it's a general sales tax, the voter intent going into it is with a resolution for streets and maintenance and all that sort of thing. It would take a pretty catastrophic event for me as a commissioner to revoke that resolution and spend that money. And I think, I know, but let me finish, please. And then, like me as a commissioner now, I mean, the joint communications and that one was how long ago? 30 years?
1993, ma'am.
And
30 years.
93, ma'am.
we're still talking about voter intent for that, so.
It matters. The voter intent does
It
matter.
matters.
And that's.
And if you're worried about that, you have to think about who you're voting for as a commissioner.
That's exactly right.
So,
Fair enough.
Jeff,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have some cards, if anybody had, I can hand them out if anybody wanted to reach out to the city if they had any additional questions or if they were wanting some feedback.
Julie said that she's got some cards. If you ever came up with another question or needed some wanted to provide some feedback on something like this, she'd be glad to hand those out, and that gives you a direct link to someone to complain to if that's all you want to do. That's fine too. So.
If anybody wants one, please let me know.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
You know how to get a hold of the site. So you gotta call Pat.